All right, everybody. It is time to begin Business 900, the policy course. This is week 1, where we read the 5 most important questions by Peter Drucker. The best edition of this, I think, is this one that has the input from the range of business practitioners, scholars, and so on. This is the one produced by the Leader to Leader Institute and gets into the issue of assessing organizations. And this one, of course, is focused on nonprofits, but all of the questions are relevant to strategy, decision-making, and policy-making within for-profit organizations as well. You do have the advantage of very, very short introductory sections to each question, plus the brief bits of feedback and sort of case studies from persons who lead organizations. In terms of working on this week's journal and discussion board, in the context of looking at particularly this book, The 5 Most Important Questions, when I mention picking a question area, I'm talking about one of the broad questions, one of the 5. And then within the question area, diving into the particulars. So for instance, you might, for your assignment, decide that you want to handle question number 2, who is our customer? And on the book's page 23, you see the subsequent questions to who is our customer, right? Who is our primary customer? Who are our supporting customers, and how will our customers change? And what I want you to do is perform analysis to derive answers, right, for your own business setting. These should be pretty well fleshed out too. The descriptions of who our customer would be, dealing with, all right, a lot of the elements of a demographic, right? So their lifestyle, their age, their gender, where they live, their instincts, their values, their behaviors. Just flesh it out as much as you can to understand who the customer is. And in the midst of that, I would highly recommend that you, if you're doing who is our customer, that you get a sense of the problem the customer has that your organization attempts to solve. And that kind of starts to highlight the interaction effect, right, between the organization and the customer. But now let's just set up, say, broadly speaking, our initial lecture on the text. I'll just kind of do a broad overview. Pose a few features of the text I find interesting, and highlight as well the micro topics that come up that I want to present to you. And the idea behind the micro topics is it's me digging away at current discussions, the current conversation about management, strategy, value proposition design, business model design, that kind of thing. Looking at scholars and bloggers and practitioners and trying to get a sense of how they approach their organizations. And of course, there could be dozens and dozens of options for me. I'll pick on some that I find interesting and try to provoke you to do your own, calling this, say, building up of a knowledge base or of a resource base. So looking at Peter Drucker's 5 Most Important Questions, an underlying element of this is present in all of Drucker's thought on management. And this lays down a foundation for the course in general, right? That the really crucial resource in an organization would be its people. And, right, the management's job is primarily about people, right? To prepare them and to free them, right? To set them free so that they achieve a degree of autonomy in their work, so that they can perform. And at the core of the questions in this text, the value proposition is in the middle of the 5 questions. It's what it is that the customers value that's really key to our structuring of policies to guide our organization, right? So customers are the center of all strategy. And so kind of derived from this, you see Drucker's policies that that are hinted at throughout this little book. You want to build up the existence of knowledge workers. You want to have a kind of an organizational framework which is evocative of what we call planned abandonment. And that you should always be assessing your organization. This is a crucial task of managers. That you don't freeze into place the policy structure and expect things to just kind of move along. That would be forgetful of the company. It would be forgetful of yourself and of your role. And furthermore, Drucker poses the notion that company failure and management failure arises very often. The scholarship evidence on this is quite widespread. It's not because we're not trying. People are actually trying. Yet failure, we've discovered, is usually based upon a lack of focus and a lack of tool competence. So that's why this book is very handy. It's very, very focused, first off. Sort of meets with Drucker's broader vision and the scholarly evidence on lack of focus. And not only this, but it really is a toolkit, right? So it's intended to kind of give you a brief glance at a basic toolkit. And what you want to do is practice it a little bit this week. So you get a little better understanding of drilling into the tools in a focused manner, fleshing out the answers as carefully as possible. That's the primary rubric of the week. I'm looking for a lot of depth of analysis on one of the questions and the sub-questions from the text. The model usually that Drucker had used in a lot of his writings was that managers are operating within environments which are constantly presenting opportunities to them. So, this model of policy that we are engaged in is sort of a search for those opportunities. And you need a competence in being able to develop this ongoing awareness of what is happening around you, coupled with assessment tools. These require the competence, and as well, that's good enough in a sense for some situations, but usually even more so, you need to have commitment. Now, these are the three sort of legs, shall we call it, of a good leader, of a good business practitioner, of the correct candidate for any job description. Somebody who does something better than you do, and you hire them. You make sure that they're aware of opportunities to grow, to practice their skills, that they have the competence ready, at the ready, and that they are fully committed. All of this is developing sort of a business model, shall we call it, intersecting into a policy structure that tells us what we should do. It also tells us what we should not do. A big theme in the text, I think, to watch for is that you're not interested in creating customers, really. The best customers create fans, right? Highly devoted, highly loyal customers. The value question is crucial because the way that we identify what is to be valued is from our customers. They're the ones who are sending us this signal, shall we call it, of what is to be valued. And what it is they value, that's the most important question. And it turns out that is often the least asked question. This will be actually a little bit of a micro topic that I'll raise. It's got to do with the notion of how teams that lead organizations are often good with the competence of being detail-oriented, but bad in terms of their focus, right? That is to say, they're not detail-oriented in the right way. And it kind of goes back to this issue of the value proposition. So I'll highlight some evidence in that regard. In terms of the section of the text regarding results, this is kind of the heavy lifting of a lot of management, identifying what our goal would be, having a plan in place, and putting into place correct measures. I think you get some pretty good advice from Drucker in terms of how many goals you should have, how should you fashion those goals. You should make sure that those goals have the characteristic of being smart. Look that acronym on the internet and you'll discover what I mean. And right, that the actions that are being pursued and the budget that has been established, these things derive from the plan, right? So those are kind of highlights from this pretty short text that introduces the policy course. Now let's throw into the mix some of the micro topics. Now, broadly speaking, the micro topics are kind of looking at, varied issues within a context of teams, of the CEO, the primary leader of the organization, and the primary policymaker. And we're also considering kind of the agility question, the resilience question, how we handle the future that's coming our way is crucial. Now, when we go through all of this through the next 8 weeks, I want you to keep in mind evidence on the best organizations in the world has been developed over the past couple of decades, and I find recent work on the 86 most successful organizations from the past century. Some management scholars dove in and figured out that there were 3 simple rules that one could identify that were present in those most successful organizations. The first rule was that you should never compete on price, that you should differentiate or be a cost leader, and neither of these is price competition. The second rule is that you should, of course, pursue the net revenue generating projects. That is, there is a value proposition that kind of undergirding that value proposition is our assessment of the willingness to pay for our solution to somebody's problem. And then an assessment of the economic cost of the solution to that problem. Right? The difference between the willingness to pay and the economic cost is known as the surplus, the total surplus in economics. The pricing matter is just dependent on the willingness to pay compared to the economic cost. The price needs to be somewhere between those in order to enable the customer and the producer for our organization to both engage in the exchange in a manner that makes us both better off. This is captured in point 2, that you should be pursuing net revenue generating projects. That's things that should be adding value to resources and to people who utilize our goods and services. And the third basic rule is there are no other rules, and that's very insightful. These organizations have a wide range of structures, policies regarding compensation and control, and it turns out most policy is meant and it should be flexible. We put our plan into place, we launch an organization's project or something similar to this. The plan will never really survive its contact with reality. So you can't think that a policy has to stay as is. Only the first 2 rules are really written in stone. Everything else is subject to change. The ideas I want to give you today regard your team, and I'll focus a little bit on how you can build high-performance teams. There's some very good scholarship on this in the last few years. We'll look at a little bit of info on the CEO, what kind of leader you want in a CEO. And under the what's next theme, this is the issue of responsiveness to the future, right? First bit of evidence regarding looking at teams in organizations being focused in the right way, right? Second thing, how teams actually are ineffective. Thirdly, what is it that's been discovered about team innovations? Another issue of how to know your team. There's a book that I think is interesting by Marcus Buckingham called Stand Out. I'll also consider some CEO blind spots that have been discovered of late, and there's a little bit of extra stuff on team dysfunction. When it comes to focus, the evidence shows that CEOs think their teams are focused in a certain manner, but they tend to have some trouble. A little bit of recent analysis was done from Bloomberg's Business Week analysis. It's a couple years ago, considering sort of a lack of focus. And the article I was reading from Bloomberg was a focus on the auto industry of Detroit, as well as the city leadership there. It turns out that it provoked a little bit of additional data gathering with the discovery that around 90% of CEOs think their teams can actually articulate the value proposition of their business organization or even their not-for-profit. But only about 20% of teams can actually articulate the value proposition. And that shows you a little bit of a misalignment. So that kind of highlights the importance of the five most important questions text once more. Here are the 7 habits of highly ineffective teams. Having a bias for insiders, or adopting existing policies, not shifting the power center of a business, using established metrics to try to assess the team's innovations, right? Failing to create a good sort of distinct culture so the team can actually flourish, trying to use existing processes when you want the team to kind of go beyond the current business arrangements, and of course the pressure to conform. This is from a text by Govindajaran and Trimble, and I really learned about this from a reviewer named Jeffrey Phillips, who's a consultant out there. And right, this the kind of general idea behind Trimble and Govindajaran's book was to ask the question about what makes a team a winning management team. And this is a text about dysfunction, basically. It's called, quote, the text title is called The Other Side of Innovation, Solving the Executive Challenge. It's under $20 at Amazon, so it's a good leadership text to have on your bookshelf. I highly recommend it. Let's see, what would make a team very innovative? Well, that's sort of some lessons that are provoked by this book. And there's an interesting and fascinating blog by Scott D. Anthony. Now, that guy is the managing director of InnoSight Asia Pacific. And on his blog one day, he was looking at scholars who talk about teams and team function and effectiveness. And he kind of pinned down one of the common themes he discovered, which is teams tend to have too few outsiders. So the team needs outsiders to be more innovative. Now, the outsider means maybe from another company, but it also means from other business units. And you don't want to have sort of the core of your business represented on an innovative team, because disruptive innovations tend to happen from the non-core parts of your organization. How do you get to know your team? Here I want to mention the author. His name is Steve Julius. He's the director of player programs and player development for the Chicago Bulls. You know, pro sports teams focus on building confidence and resilience so that their team can perform well under stress. And managers of businesses can learn of this process that these sports teams work on. And so Stephen Julius, he was interviewed, and it's a YouTube video that highlights a little bit of this. It's from a guy named Tony Kukoc. You can analyze his shooting in the 1994 playoff game to kind of get a sense of this notion of grace under pressure. He had 1.5 seconds left to hit a shot and win. Julius, was somebody who picks up on this notion of the player being resilient under pressure and begins to work out a great deal of the psychology to help team managers and coaches deal with individual differences and team performance, how they should behave at crunch time and things that happen. It's really a theme of coaching to watch out for. So if you can find some of Steve Julius's interviews or articles about him. I highly encourage checking that out. And one of his interesting findings is you have to realize that you act under pressure in a certain way, but others are going to react to pressure in ways different from you, and that's very important to keep in mind. That kind of builds up your ability to coach and to lead better. Now, the text by Marcus Buckingham, just briefly mentioned something about it. It's called Stand Out. It's called Finding Your Edge and Win at Work. And what we're talking about here is a competitive advantage at the individual level, with the theme being that you want to build yourself. And research shows people excel if they get to capitalize on their strengths and their passions. So if you're a leader inside top management, here's a pivotal policy issue to be dealing with. You've got to understand the personalities of the individuals who work in the organization. You've got to be able to identify and pinpoint their strengths and align them to the performance tasks that you have for them. This is kind of basic stuff, right? But Buckingham's important. He has a blog called Strengths Campus, and his primary work had been at the Huffington Post. He has a Twitter feed also, but what he was dealing with for the Gallup organization for a long time was a tool called the Strengths Finder, and he helped to fashion that. It worked for about 10 years inside Gallup. And what he realized was that was a good, that was a good tool for finding natural talent, but he wanted to go deeper, and he was really interested in how you could kind of leverage that tool in new ways. So this book, Stand Out, is really all about strengths assessment, really key for leading organizations. And Marcus Buckingham wrote another book called The Leader of the Strengths Revolution, right? So handy reference to have on your shelf and to read. Team dysfunction. Yeah, there's lots of reasons why teams basically mess up. And this has to do with, bad things happening that create, low performance teams. Yeah, you can't want team-based results unless you have a team-based structure in place. That is a big pitfall. You also, you tend to overestimate task focus with teams. And processes and relationships are very, very crucial. Teams need to back up and they need to communicate with each other. They need to figure out how they're going to run meetings, how are they going to make decisions, what processes they want to use to solve problems, what's going to be the basis of assigning responsibilities. Those are elements that are crucial. Also, teams tend to think of a lone star as really the key, to organizational change and development, and that's a big problem because the talent pool is actually much more broad. And when you go to launch a team, the startup team, maybe something ad hoc gets put into place, is often ruined because they don't know how to resolve conflicts and personality differences, how to achieve consensus. They need to be trained to work on a team. And if they're not trained well, you're going to get somebody who's bossy. You're going to get others that don't pull their weight. You're going to have people who don't know what to do. There'll be passive-aggressive kinds of behaviors in these teams. This is insight that's coming from Richard Beckhard and David Gleicher. And, this is rooted in questions they ask in their analysis work. Why change initiatives fail at a 70% rate? Why do team leaders, create dysfunctional teams? How you get the team to work hard every single day. And what it is that, they have a nutshell kind of formula called D times V times F greater than R. D is dissatisfaction, and V is vision. F is the first steps that affect change, and R is resistance. So what it is you've got to have an organization with the D variable, the V variable, and the F variable set up so that you can overcome the resistance. So you have to generate, for instance, a case for change document. You have to practice responses to the obstacles you know you're going to face. You're going to see challenges and problems in the current situation that could cripple the team's ability to successfully change the organization. These all go into the notion of launching the team, but giving them training. Let's look at the CEO. So here's a topic I like, which really kind of looks at the issue of executives who become bullies. And I highlight this because you should ask yourself sort of a self-assessment questions that you can identify. Basically, can you detect whether you've become sort of a Theory X leader instead of a collaborative leader? I want to highlight some leadership blogs where CEOs get advice. I'll look at a Google mistake that they corrected. And let's look at some evidence on reports that CEOs have. So leaders are often respected and have high emotional IQs. But too many executives wind up becoming bullies. They need to prevent this. So how do you do that, right? How do you keep them from getting the power going to their emotions and then becoming out of control? You have to have a high ethical bar. You have to have a leadership charter of some kind. You have to have a no bullying rule, right? People have to be allowed to call out bullying behaviors. You have to have a kind of pass the ball culture, especially among top leaders. The leader has to welcome contrary views and voice. And you got to look in the mirror. So that's what I want to deal with this slide. You got to look in the mirror. Here's a variety of questions to ask yourself that if you catch yourself doing these kinds of things, you might be an executive bully. So ask these statements of yourself and see if they basically describe you or not. No scoring is needed here. You'll know. Just trust me, you'll know. And this, by the way, is an assessment device from Susan Annunzio. She's the CEO of the Center for High Performance. Listen, just an excerpt from one of their research studies called The Hidden Costs of Executive Bullying. First question. You tend to label people who disagree with you as naysayers, as risk-averse or incompetent. Second, you're taken by surprise when things go wrong. Third, no one ever finds fault with your point of view. Fourth, you deliver results, but people don't enjoy working for you. 5, your direct reports don't really tell you bad news. 6, there's little disagreement or debate among your leadership or the people you surround yourself with. 7, when your team does debate an issue, are there winners and losers? 8, you always believe you're the smartest one in the room. 9, you believe you're better at almost everything than anyone else on your team. 10, you quickly fall in love with an idea, a position, or the deal. 11, you blame others when things go wrong. 12, you rarely admit mistakes and you rarely apologize. And 13, you're an expert at catching others when they have an error. Leadership blogs. Frode Hyman is a Norwegian native. He built a ranking of the 100 greatest leadership blogs. He writes in English, by the way, so just look up Frode Hyman, Heiman. I want to highlight his blog rank number 1. It's by Daniel H. Pink. It's called The Genius Hour. It's sort of a 60 minutes on working with ideas and mastering skills. Here, Pink tells the story of Jen Scheffner, where he highlights how autonomy was tapped into in this sort of training exercise. Now, Pink would tell that story, and most of us who blog would say, yeah, there you go. And there were all these innovations he describes, and there was something going off base, And Pink explains that this business leader got something, right? Quote, Who answers the phone when an employee is on a genius hour? Jen does, the leader does. Jen steps up and does her staff's jobs so they have time to do the big work of thinking and just, policy making. Here, Pink says in his blog, imagine if managers were like this, showing great levels of integrity and commitment. And he concludes, quote, genius hours are not ad hoc. They're fixed on the departmental calendar. That hour is sacred, or at least semi-sacred. In most organizations, a scheduled item gets done. Another rank and file sort of blog that's highlighted on Hyman's list is by Miranda Gibson. Another one is Michael Hyatt. Actually, Hyatt's is ranked number 2. And he relies on lots of guest contributors. That's kind of an interesting blogging methodology. And Hyman had his own, particular methodology. His rankings are captured at his blog. It's at nevermindthemanager.com. All one word, nevermindthemanager. There's actually an entire post on the Genius Hour listed by reference to Pink's site. So look for leadership blogs as a resource. I think that's really crucial. And look up Pink and Hyatt and Samosko for reference to their insights and how they blog, how they give us advice. Where should CEOs get advice from? That's just interesting scholarship on this topic. I think it's just, it kind of is a tiny element of a policy structure. But it does show you that you can see these researchers wondering, well, where are you getting good advice from? Where are you getting bad advice from? An interesting article from the MIT Sloan Management Review considered data. This is from Daniel Levin doing research on knowledge transfer and organizational learning. Now, Levin, he's a professor at Rutgers Business School. His downloadable research paper I would reference is called, quote, Perceived Trustworthiness of Knowledge Sources, the Moderating Impact of Relationship Length, end quote. The gist of this is that a long-lost colleague can be a valuable advisor. They tend to be more valuable than current colleagues. It has to do with the way that social capital accrues to persons in relationships where there is this sort of measure here on dormancy of a relationship. And what you get is more value and more novelty when you tap into what was a dormant relationship compared to current ones. It's because you get unexpected new insights, fresh insights from those persons. Very interesting technique. Google made a mistake once, and let's look at what Google did so that we learn. I mean, it's okay to make mistakes, right? You've got to fix them. Google executives say they're not crunching all their data all the time, on successful management. There's a story by Adam Bryant in the New York Times regarding the Google leaders. What they were doing was they were studying their staffers, asking what do the rank and file people value in their managers. Now, they thought that the highly effective managers would exhibit certain characteristics that they thought would be key. In fact, the analytics team at the company produced something called the 8 Habits of Their Highly Effective Google Managers. Some among these were things like have a clear vision and strategy for your team, help your employees with career development, and don't be a sissy, be productive, be results-oriented, that kind of thing. The list is pretty long, and it actually kind of is like a whiteboard gag, actually. If you were working at the office or you read Dilbert, it sounds like a Dilbert comic. So Google does some analysis and asks, what is it that the employees really value? What they valued most, it turns out, were even-keeled bosses. They made time for one-on-one meetings. They sat down with people, helping them puzzle through problems. They asked questions. They had an interest in the lives of the employees and their careers. This is surprising to Google because they believed that the rank and file would have valued technical expertise among their managers. Technical expertise, it turned out, ranked last among the 8 qualities Google had identified. So Laszlo Bock, he's the Senior Vice President for People Operations at Google, says in the interview at the Times, quote, "In the Google context, we've always believed that to be a manager on the engineering side, you needed to be deeper a technical expert than the people who work for you. But," he said, "it turns out that's the least important thing. It pales. Much more important is making a connection to a person and being accessible to a person." What's the takeaway for us? I think it's the notion that when you think about what employees value in their managers, you need to have a kind of leg up, which is emotional intelligence is much more crucial. Would you rather sort of hone the managers with, business school technical power, or, gather evidence from your own staff to identify what it is they value? And then from that, make sure you design policy in terms of how managers interact with people. How many reports do you have? Crucial. A manager has a span of control. And the complications that arise in the span of control are kind of underappreciated. When you add subordinates, things look to be additive in a linear fashion. So, maybe you have 4 subordinates, maybe you have 5 or 6. The number of potential interactions, though, climbs, right, geometrically. When you have 4 subordinates, you have around 40 interactions. Basically, it's 44 interactions. When you have 5 subordinates, 100 interactions arise. When you go from 7 to 8, and here's the key, 7 subordinates, you're around 490 interactions that you would want to have to kind of be aware of and assess and sort. So 7 seems to be top end. I'll tell you why. At 8 reports, you have 1,080 intersections. See, so span of control, classic business concept. It comes up basically when the Air Force actually announced it was restructuring, the 18th Air Force. They mentioned that they're interested in the span of control in their organization. And they were focused on the U.S. Transportation Command section of the 18th Air Force. The same day that this announcement on restructuring, there was a Hewlett-Packard vice president who also began to describe the notion of splitting up account management in one of the divisions in Hewlett-Packard. In part of the interview that he discloses, he kind of gets on the notion of, hey, there's no real right answer here, but you have to become aware of the tendency of the span of control idea to be limited to the notion of that linear number of persons reporting to the manager. And you tend to miss out and not recognize that crucial level, especially between 7 and 8, where the span of control collapses. So that's first week for us. Go off and maybe read the 5 most important questions, especially read the Porter article. I don't really cover that one in detail because I want you to wrestle with it personally and post your response as requested in this week's tasks. For now, I'll stop and we'll put this up into week 1.